Hey, Serge.
Hey, Anna.
Wow, we're back.
Yeah, welcome back, guys. We're finally recording another session. This one's going to be a Randocast with the holiday season coming up.
If you guys are looking for last-minute gifts for your friends, Secret Santa, or just exchanging gifts with your family, all that good stuff.
We got some great book recommends for you guys.
Or at least we think they're good.
We've got the good ones. We also have the stay away. If you already bought it, return it. Do not buy. This is like a big XXX. Do not do it. Let's just launch into it.
All right, so let's start with a sci-fi book that we both read recently.
Yeah, so sci-fi, Sea of Rust.
His name is C. Robert Cargill.
So his first name is just a first initial?
Yes.
Oh, it's very mysterious. Okay, so this guy doesn't want to give his first name away, but don't let that fool you, because the book is really great. It's kind of like a cowboy western set in the far future, post-apocalypse. Humans are long gone, but now the world is undergoing a second apocalypse where the beings that have replaced humans, the robots, are also about to become extinct. Very interesting. Give it a read if you like the Western genre.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It definitely has this Western cowboyish feel, even though it basically takes place in the Midwest. Way in the future, Midwest.
Yes.
But Midwest nonetheless.
Pretty much the entire thing is like set in Ohio, I think, right?
Somewhere in that vicinity, I think.
Now, we do have a sci-fi short story. It's called Machine Learning, New and Collected Stories by Hugh Howey. And Anna has read this and has been filling my ears with praise for this book. In fact, I've actually started reading it myself because she has recommended it so highly.
It's actually the opposite side of the coin of Sea of Rust. Sea of Rust is, the AI and robots think that humanity has gone as far as it can and there's no hope for humans, and there's basically a war between robots and humans. Machine Learning, New and Collected Stories by Hugh Howey actually takes another view of everything. Sort of humans and AI learn to coexist. Most of the stories have to do with AI and sentience, or the possibility of sentience from the point of view of humans, whereas Sea of Rust was from the point of view of a robot. The stories, I feel, have been done in unique ways that haven't really been tackled by other writers. So, I thought that most robot AI books seem to tackle the inevitable robot apocalypse, i.e. Sea of Rust. Whereas Howie seems to just see AI as something that wants to survive despite the presence of humans and maybe with the presence of humans. And there's actually something hopeful and hopeless about the stories. And the cool thing about this book is actually at the end of every story is an author's note about the writing process or the background to the story. Like, why did he write it? What was his inspiration? And I think that's a really interesting touch. I really recommend this book to anyone who's interested in AI and sentience. And I do want to say, in regards to Sea of Rust by C. Robert Cargill, he's actually a screenwriter. He wrote the script for the Marvel movie Doctor Strange.
Yeah, so if you like Doctor Strange, you might actually like the book too. Going with our sci-fi theme here, we're gonna also recommend the sci-fi novella Last Machine in the Solar System by Matthew Isaac Sobin. This is a very short book, only 90 pages or so, and again, it's about an AI, as implied by the title. It really has a very great scope. It encompasses kind of the grand arc of human history. It encompasses the purpose of AI vis-a-vis the being of human, and also really explores the importance of literature in human society. And I really do like this book. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 5 stars on Goodreads, and it was definitely one of my favorite books I've read this year so far.
I do have to say that it falls in between Sea of Rust and the Machine Learning short story book because it sort of has the defeatist outlook on humanity that Sea of Rust seems to have, but also has that hopeful nature that you see in Machine Learning. And that's a really good combination. I think Matthew Isaac Sobin did a great job with that. So yeah, these 3 sci-fi books, if you guys have sci-fi friends, they'd love any of these books, I think.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with any of these 3. If you're looking for last minute gifts for your sci-fi friend, stop by your local bookseller, grab these, you're set.
Moving on to horror, I think both of us give 5 stars, 2 thumbs up to
Meddling Kids
by Edgar Quintero.
This book was amazing. It literally blew our minds.
It's Scooby-Doo meets H.P. Lovecraft in a satirical, hilarious, yet touching book about growing up and fighting bad guys. It takes the pulp horror genre and flips it on its head.
Right. So we do have to give one caveat here. We listened to this in audiobook. So, if you have a friend that's really into like the Lovecraft horror genre or really like Scooby-Doo, you could give them the print copy, but judging by the reviews in Goodreads, it's kind of a toss-up. A lot of people kind of gave it a little bit of a lower score because they didn't like it. But I feel like the narrator for the audiobook did an amazing and fantastic job. And maybe part of that is because the book lends itself to being narrated out loud. So if your friend is into audiobooks and you want to get them a gift, this is just a surefire success right here. This book on audio is amazing.
Do you have any other horror books? I mean, obviously the Fear Street books.
Yes, Fear Street, our bread and butter for this past year of 2017. If you guys just, want to dive back into the 90s, read some YA, and just sit back and enjoy, Fear Street, you probably could do worse. Does that sound like a ringing endorsement from me?
I mean, sure.
Okay.
Moving on to literary fiction, I recommend The Weight of This World by David Joy. It's about PTSD. It's about an Appalachian town, or I guess a dying Appalachian town. It's about helping someone who doesn't want your particular brand of help, or how willing you are to help yourself at someone else's expense. It's a tragic and depressing book, but it feels so real. It's dark, and it does kind of drain you as a reader, but if you like literary fiction, you want to read more, I would say like Appalachian fiction. It's one of the great modern writers that I've, discovered, David Joy, and yeah.
So what we want to do here, I think, is contrast this with the Hillbilly Elegy, because this is nothing like that. Am I correct in saying there's a little bit of beef between the two authors?
I don't think that the author for Hillbilly Elegy has beef with David Joy, but David Joy has written a few articles in response to Hillbilly Elegy. If you are interested in learning more about what David Joy has to say about Hillbilly Elegy and what many other people in that area feel, you can look up David Joy and Hillbilly Elegy.
Moving right along.
Another book of literary fiction that I would recommend is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. It's a multi-generational story of a Korean-Japanese family. It starts from 1910 about and ends in 1989. It's about how this family deals with Japanese colonization or occupation of Korea, them moving to Japan, dealing with discrimination, and then dealing with the war. And then after the war, obviously dealing with being Koreans living in Japan. There's also a bit that has to deal with religious persecution in Japan towards Christians. The book never passes judgment on any of the characters. They make mistakes and they react as anyone who've made the mistakes they've made react. When they encounter other people, judgment is passed, but you always see the other side of the situation. Everyone is multifaceted, which I think is very important for a book like this. There's no over-the-top blowouts or 2D characters that are used to move the plot, and I think the story just sort of ebbs and flows. One interesting thing I thought about this book is that it hits the different immigrant experiences for people who have the same quote-unquote root country, but different, branch countries. So the Korean-American character interacting with the Korean-Japanese character, despite them both having these strong Korean traditions, the difference in the American and Japanese experiences show almost different worlds of mentalities. And I thought that was very well handled. Diaspora is a big thing, and I feel like this book really touches on it. I think that anyone who likes literary fiction, they love the character development, character moving. This actually has a really good plot as well on top of that. And it's from a different point of view that people don't usually see.
Moving right along to the fantasy genre, I would like to recommend Brightest Fell by Seanan McGuire. This was a really new experience for me. I had not really read a lot of the...
Urban fantasy?
Correct. Urban fantasy genre. I am well versed in other forms of fantasy. I am a huge Lord of the Rings buff. I have read a lot of other fantasy novels as well. But this was my first, foray into that subsection. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I gave it a good rating on Goodreads. I believe it was 4 stars. And I think, if you have somebody that is really into that subgenre of fantasy, this is pretty much an easy gift. Even if they haven't gotten into this series, the book really brings you in and catches you up to speed really quick. So you don't necessarily have to start with the first book. You could just give them this one, and I'm sure they'll be happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, you started with just this book.
Yeah.
With no backstory, and you loved it. You actually liked it more than I did, and I read the first book in the series.
That's right. So again, this is the latest book in the series, but you can just launch right in with this one, and it'll be fine.
Another fantasy book that I would recommend, it's actually literary fantasy, I think. It's called Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. I guess it has more magical realism than pure fantasy, but it is sort of literary, and I think that anyone who likes to read about a fantastical take on things like nativism, the migration crisis, migrants, modern cities falling to internal conflict, different generations and how they view current events, with a simple love story thrown on it, I think they would like this book. I don't want to spoil it. I would just say that if you have a friend who likes literary fiction, if you have a friend who's okay with magical realism within their literary fiction, I think Murakami does books like that as well.
I believe so, yeah, based on my experiences of reading a couple of his books.
And also the latest winner of the Nobel Prize of Literature does this as well. Then I think they would like this book. I would recommend it to them.
Yeah, this seems like an easy choice. I haven't read it myself, but based on the description I got from Anna, this one is fascinating to me, and I might actually read this, and I don't think you could go wrong with this one.
Next, we actually want to thank this publishing house, Anansi Press and Groundwood Books, House of Anansi. They were kind enough to send us a package with some amazing books, and we just want to recommend a few of them.
Yeah, these guys are really right on point, and they're just hitting out of the park in pretty much every category. So why don't we start with young adult fiction?
One of their young adult books that I read was called The Mosaic by Nina Burkout. And this is considered realistic fiction. You don't really... I know this didn't get as big as some other YA books that have come out, but it's actually one of my favorite YA books that I've read this year, and I have read a few YA books. It's about a dying town in Montana and its relationship with an Air Force base. It's about a girl who doesn't think much of herself, but has more potential than she knows. It's about a veteran who has PTSD, and he's dealing with the horrors of war and trying to cope. It's about a small town dealing with their thoughts and ideas of what the war is about. Yeah, it really makes you think. It's something I think that kids should read, or teenagers should read. There is sort of a love story. They have to have love stories. I don't think it should have had one, but I do think that any, teenager, I would say 13 and up, who likes YA books, I think that this is a book that they would probably enjoy.
Yeah, and I think we want to give this a read recommend, because this is actually kind of a big deal. This book didn't break out and make all the rounds on the YouTube, book channels for the YA fiction. It didn't blow up on YA Twitter. But guess what? This is one of the big books in YA this year. And we want to really push this thing. We want to sell this. This is amazing. And this deserves to be read. This deserves to be heard.
We will do a further in-depth review of it in our coming up episode. But yeah, I do recommend it. If you have a young adult, I should say, in your house
right.
who likes reading, this is a book that I'd recommend.
Moving on, non-fiction. Spirit Bear, Encounters with the White Bear of the Western Rainforest. So, I was really interested in this because primarily of my interest in myths and legends And of course, the spirit bear is very important in the myths and legends of the Pacific Northwest, which I had become somewhat familiar with over the years. So I got the book. It's a nonfiction book. It's literally the story of a man's life and his encounters with bears over the years, culminating in the story of how he, over the course of 2 years, filmed a documentary film about the albino black bears of a certain island in British Columbia. And this book is just amazing. If you're into outdoor adventure or exploration or wildlife, this is the book for you. It's inspiring. It has a really positive message. And if you love animals, I think you're going to really enjoy this book as well. There is something here that really talks about the connection between humans and our animal kindred. And there's definitely a link that is formed between the author and the bears, especially one of the bears that he forms a very special friendship with. The stories are just out of this world. Just speaking about this bear that is this awesome creature that literally has the power of life and death over the humans because of its strength and size, and yet the interactions are just mind-boggling. You must read this. If you have a friend that's really into the outdoors, nature, or animals, this is definitely a really, fail-safe gift you can get them if you want to get them a book. Once again, Spirit Bear, Encounters with the White Bear of the Western Rainforest by Charles Russell.
Another one of their books that they were so kind to give us was Louis Undercover by Fanny Britt and Isabelle Arsenault. It's a graphic novel that was originally published in French, French-Canadian, but they translated it to English. And it's about a family, 2 boys, their alcoholic father and their anxious mother. And it's just a family story. The 2 boys are shuttled between their father and their mother, and they have to deal with their lives like that. It's beautifully illustrated. Like the images are just gorgeous. And it's almost like reading poetry. It's a very beautiful book. It's simple but very deep, and it just really cuts to all the emotions, and I feel like the artwork just really adds a special layer to it, and I do recommend this book.
What's the name of the book again?
Louis Undercover. Another book that I want to recommend by Anansi Press and Groundwood Books is a children's book. It's called What There Is Before There Is Anything There, A Scary Story, and it's by Linears. It is really cool artwork. I would say it's like subversive artwork for a kid's book. I say it's a kid's book, but I wouldn't actually recommend it for very young children. Even I thought some of the images were like nightmare fuel, and that's for me, and I am not a child.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling, but I think like older kids would like it. 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds.
Or 30. Or
30-year-olds. If you have a friend who's like a big kid who loves like artwork and kids books, like the All My Friends Are Dead type books, yeah, this is something I'd recommend. Like if you have a little nephew or niece, check this book out,
I don't think you can go wrong with this. But just don't give it to those really young 5-year-old kids because, again, #nightmare fuel.
Very true. If you have a teenager that you need to buy a gift for and they like reading fantasy, sort of magical realism, adventure type stories,
then buy them a Fear Street novel.
Exactly. But if not, there's also the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. These books came out several years ago. It's a hard to explain series because it's sort of so fantastical, but it's essentially 4 kids on a quest to find a Welsh king, and they all have their different reasons for finding him. It takes place in modern day, so obviously Welsh king, well, that's where the fantasy, magical realism element comes in. There are 4 books, so it's really hard to go into what the plot is, but I just will say that if you have a friend who likes, if you have a friend or need to buy a book for one of your teenage relatives, then this is the series to check out.
Oh, okay, so obviously the parallel is very clear for me here. I know you've been reading this cycle all year, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, but it suddenly crystallized in my mind. How does this compare to Harry Potter?
I haven't been reading it all year. It took me a month to read all 4 books. But anyways, how does it compare to Harry Potter? It's a very different book series than Harry Potter. You might as well be asking me how Twilight compares to Harry Potter.
Huh. All right, moving right along. Let's talk about what you don't want to buy this year, because honestly, there's been a lot of hype about some books, and we think that, you know what, maybe you best steer clear. So let's move right along to one of Anna's favorite series of all time. These are books that she has long cherished, authors that she respects, and yet the latest offering
in the Pendergast series by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. It's called Obsidian Chamber. And I do have to say that with their previous book, Crimson Shore, I was already raising my eyebrows about them books. And then by the time I got to Obsidian Chamber, I almost just quit their series. I mean, I'm still going to get their next book that comes out in January and read that because I just love torturing myself book-wise.
Oh, jeez.
But Obsidian Chamber is honestly one of the worst books I have read. I mean, I'll save the worst book for my next book coming up, but Obsidian Chamber took everything that anyone would love about the Pendergast series and just sort of brought it up to 100, ripped things up, it was ridiculous. I mean, there's an entire plot. The book opens following Proctor, who is sort of a bodyguard, butler type character. And you follow him on his quests in Africa. And then that entire storyline is dropped until, I would say, the last chapter. And he apparently went on this great adventure and that you never get to see. And why did you have that storyline? It doesn't make sense. And then other storylines just don't make sense. This whole book doesn't make sense. And if you like the Pendergast series, don't read this book. Just read it for the last chapter because that will help set up the next book. That's honestly all you need. What an awful book.
Bottom line, don't buy Obsidian Chamber for your friend or yourself. And if you plan on continuing the series, which you probably shouldn't after this book, just get it from the library and read the last chapter. Now, the next book has been very controversial over the last few months. Handbook for Mortals by Lani Sarum. I mean, this thing made the New York Times bestseller list for about, a hot 5 seconds?
23 hours.
Ooh.
They actually hired an agency that knew how to manipulate the system. They ordered a ton of books at bookstores they knew that would be tracked by the New York Times, and that's how they made the bestseller list. But let me tell you, had they not done this, this book would not have sold one copy. Ooh. It is the worst book. Not only the worst book I have read this year, this is the worst book I have ever read. And I read a book this year that I spent an entire day, 8-9 hours writing a review. I gave it 1 star. I spent 9 hours writing a review. This book is worse than that book. It is so awful. So it's one of those obvious stories where the author is the main character. Just, based on how the character is described and the picture of the author. And that's okay. Like a lot of authors do that. That's absolutely fine. Except when the entire thing is just wish fulfillment turned up to 1,000. It is written like it's supposed to be a screenplay, but it's a movie that no one will want to watch. It's sort of like, it is the literary equivalent of The Room, except...
Oh my god.
Not good. It is like...
Well, what do you mean except not good? The Room is not good.
But The Room is so bad that it's almost good. Like, that's why James Franco made that Disaster Artist movie, right? He's probably going to win an Oscar for making a movie about the making of The Room. Like, this will not reach that critical level of acclaim in that regard because it's just so bad. There's no redeeming qualities to it. For instance, the character is talking about how she looks, and then she talks about how, like, she has a thigh gap. But it's not important that she has a thigh gap, but she has a thigh gap, and she wants you to know that she has a thigh gap, but she wants you to know that it's not important that she has a thigh gap, and, like, it's really shallow for people to want her to have a thigh gap, and she's not one of those shallow girls, but she has a thigh gap.
Can I just barf right now? Can I just, barf?
But honestly, it's a bad book. Just don't waste your time on it.
Another book.
So, I wouldn't say this is on the same level as Obsidian Chamber or Handbook for Mortals. It's Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. a movie for it actually came out. So I know that because a movie just came out, it's probably going to be front and center in the YA section, and you're going to be tempted to get it because it's there. And I'll just say it's not a bad book per se, but it's not a good book. There are a lot of flaws in this book. There are plot holes that I could probably drive every single truck in existence through. There are plot holes that once you figure out what's going on, the book stops making any sort of sense. It just doesn't make sense. If you've read John Green sick lit books, immediately you can tell that some things don't make sense in this book. And John Green is not like the pinnacle of knowing how medicine works, and I felt like he did a better job. So that was, an issue. There's just a lot of plot holes and nitpicks that you can get through, and then the book just doesn't become fun anymore. And the ending sucks as well. Nicola Yoon does have another book out called The Sun Is Also a Star. If you want to get a Nicola Yoon book, get that book instead. That's a great book. This book is not that good a book.
By the way, we had a book come out this summer. It was called Handbook for... No, not Handbook for Mortals. We already just talked about that one. Jeez. What am I thinking about? I was talking about the assassin's story with the knife. What's that one called? Wow, I'm really losing the plot here. It was called The Aristocrat's Travel Across Europe on a Train with His Gay Lover. Gentleman's Guide, right? What was it called? To Vice and Virtue. Yes, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. Guys, highly overrated. Anna of the Red Read podcast has sampled this book, and she has decided that, you know what? All the other YA reviewers out there were completely off base, thinking that this was some kind of like amazing, mind-blowing, groundbreaking whatever, because it wasn't. It was just run-of-the-mill, and honestly, you could do much better.
So, you haven't read the book, and you've added it to this section, and I didn't add it to the section, and I did read the book, so that's interesting. I will say that I do think it was a little overrated. It was one of the most hyped books that I've come across, and that's actually why I read it, because it was so hyped. And I did find it very underwhelming.
Run of the mill, right? It was just like an average YA book. It wasn't like terrible. We're not saying it's like Handbook for Mortals. We're not saying it's Obsidian Chamber. We're not saying it's like everything. We're just saying it's like just run of the mill, average YA book, but somehow hyped up to like the stratosphere.
I honestly do think that if you decide to buy this book for your teenage relative or a friend who likes YA books, that they will probably like it. I don't have anything against it.
But what I want to say to you guys is that the actual YA book that we did recommend is going to be better, and they'll like it more.
I say that it's very different. Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue definitely has more YA tropes in it, and The Mosaic doesn't. It does read more like realistic fiction, but Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, I mean, it's like eating a cheesecake versus eating, a really nice cantaloupe.
Cantaloupe. I would say, like, remember when we had Friendsgiving and somebody, like, put a cheese in the oven? Oh, that was so good, right? That was, like, really good. It was, like, salty and savory, but, like, the cheese that was baked.
You're really losing the plot here.
I'm just trying to, like, draw, comparisons here between food and books.
Right. So, Gentleman's Guide, Vice and Virtue is cheesecake, I'd say. And who doesn't like cheesecake? But it's just like one of those plain cheesecakes that you can buy at, the store. It's not the greatest, but it's still cheesecake, and cheesecake is still good if you like cheesecake.
Right.
Whereas The Mosaic, I would say, is something, it's just a little more serious,
Yes, like that.
The pastry puffed brie.
Oh, the brie. Oh, that's what it was. Guys, like, seriously, stick that stuff in the oven. Oh, so good.
Oh, I think it was the pastry puffed brie with crackers. It was a great dish.
Oh, man. All right,
you should have that for your holiday meal, FYI, guys.
Right? Yeah. So anyway, thank you for listening to our holiday gift guide. We hope it was somewhat informative. If you, like me, are waiting this long to buy a gift for your special person that likes reading books, then good luck to you. I hope this helps. Let's just put it that way. I hope this helps.
Well, I hope it helped you, Serge.
Oh, but yes, it certainly didn't, because you've already read all these books. Now I'm going to have to, like, go to your Goodreads or something.
All right, guys. Sorry we haven't put anything out recently. Every time we were about to record, work piles up and something happens, and we're really sorry. My trip abroad really screwed up our timing, and I apologize for that.
And my work schedule's been really brutal lately, and I also apologize for that. I hope we can clear this up in the coming year. And 2018, we're going to aim for more episodes and just really nail that theory that we have going on with the Fear Street, right? I mean,
the mythos.
Yeah, we have some good ideas, guys. You should go back and listen. I think we're starting to crack this nut.
I mean, we do have the outline for our next episode.
So in case you guys are wondering, we've already read the book, the second cheerleader book.
I'm halfway through the third cheerleader book at this point.
So we've got this taken care of. Those episodes will post probably in 2018. You should be looking for those, and we're going to keep going strong.
We're so thankful to have you guys as our listeners. I know Thanksgiving was last month, but honestly, we're really thankful that you guys are listening to us, that you guys are subscribed to us, that you guys give us feedback and let us know, that you're out there. That means a lot, and we really appreciate it. And that's really one of the best gifts that we can get is from you guys.
Thank you. And that's really what has kept us going this whole year, is seeing that subscriber count grow, seeing those comments come in. We really appreciate that, and we're going to keep doing this for you.
So thanks a lot. Have a safe and happy holiday, and if your holiday has gone by, we are so sorry that we missed that. Just work has been crazy, guys.
Have an amazing new year, and we'll see you in the new year for sure.
Thanks, guys.